Hello, good people. Todd Shannon, data scientist, social commentator, getter of buckets, coming back at you again with another video. And what are we talking about today? We're talking about affirmative action. You see, the highest court in the land of the US of A has put the smackdown on race-based preferences for admission to colleges and universities. And this is a good thing, my friends. But it isn't self-evident that this is a good thing. Because when we talk about these race-based preferences and affirmative action, it is just assumed that the reason why these preferences and these policies persist is because it is good for minorities. That's presumed. It isn't really even questioned whether or not it's good for minorities. It's good for the people who, quote, benefit from these preferences. You see, if you take a black kid, little Raheem, he grew up in the hood, single mom, and the reason why his math is not as good as Johnny from the suburbs is because, Johnny from the suburbs had more money, so therefore we have to equal the playing field, and we have to put Raheem in the elite institution, and therefore if we do that, then black people and Raheem and the rest of his descendants or what have you will be equitable to Johnny's in the future. That's the presumption, but is it true? And this is why I like to make evidence-based arguments, because there is clear and obvious evidence that that is not true. You know what I find? Leftist ideologies and leftist policies often have the benefit of the people that they're supposedly for as a secondary goal. The primary goal often is virtue signaling and just promoting a certain ideology, promoting a certain view of the world that they think is correct. And if you can provide actual tangible evidence that the thing that they're doing is actually hurting the people they say they want to help, that very rarely actually causes them to shift or change their priorities. Now, just think about that. If you said that you were doing something to help someone, and then so you could be shown that you weren't actually helping them, and you kept doing it anyway, what would that say about you? But I digress. We're going to look at two videos today. One by a Mr. Malcolm Gladwell. I don't know if you know a lot about Malcolm Gladwell, but Malcolm Gladwell is actually one of my favorite social commentators. He wrote one of the most, still to this day, my favorite nonfiction book that I've ever read. It's called Outliers. I highly recommend it. I've read at least probably 4 of his books, and most of the time he does not disappoint. But Malcolm Gladwell is also a writer for the New York Times. He's clearly on the left. So this is not some right-wing activist trying to make the case that they don't want affirmative action because, they like that good old boy inequality. Malcolm Gladwell shuts all that down because everyone knows what his political ideology is, and yet he makes the clear case, inadvertently, I think, because I think he's actually not intending to make this case, but we'll see as he goes through. So let's listen to Malcolm Gladwell make this case, and he's effectively saying that class rank is more important than the actual school you go to. Let's listen to him. Get this queued up here. All right.
That at Hartwick College, the kids in the top third, with the top third SAT scores, end up getting well over half of the STEM degrees, and the kids with the bottom scores end up getting very few of the STEM degrees. Those kids over there are dropping out like flies. Right? This would seem to suggest that our original hypothesis that persistence is a function of cognitive ability is true. And we can also go further. We can say, if this hypothesis is true, as we go to more and more selective institutions, we should see a very different pattern of persistence. We should see less kids dropping out because the kids are all smarter.
No, he's making this case for this college called Hartwick College. Now, I've never heard of Hartwick. It certainly isn't an Ivy League school, so this is important to note.
Right? So let's go to Harvard. These numbers are a few years old, but at Harvard, you can see that the bottom third of math SAT scores among kids doing science and math are equal to the top third at Hartwick. The dumb students at Harvard are as smart as the smart students at Hartwick. So you'd think everybody at Harvard should be getting a math and science degree, right? Why would they drop out? Everyone's so smart. What do we see? Oh, dear. What we see is the exact same pattern at Harvard that we saw at Hartwick. The top kids are getting all the degrees. The kids at the bottom aren't getting any degree. They're dropping out like flies, right? Even though these kids are brilliant. Well, clearly what we're seeing here is that persistence in science and math is not simply a function of your cognitive ability. It's a function of your relative standing in your class.
All right. So you see him lay this out. I encourage you to watch this entire video because he makes some fascinating observations. And one, he even puts a name on it. There's basically this idea that your perception of yourself essentially and your success often has to do with how you view yourself within your immediate circle. He talks about this and how this is also a phenomenon in prosperous countries, where countries are prosperous and people are, quote, happy. There's actually much more depression and suicide there than they are in, these countries where the living conditions are actually horrible. And the reason why is because when you live in a place where the living conditions are horrible, everyone's doing bad, so you don't even know that you're doing that bad, right? But if you live in a place where people live in mansions and they've got big, expensive cars, and you drive just a regular car and you got just a regular house, you can feel like a failure. And he also goes on to give actual statistics on how your percentages of actually succeeding in college and getting your degree, particularly in STEM fields, actually goes down precipitously as your class rank is diminished. So this is important. See, what I like about this is that these are facts. As the great Ben Shapiro says, facts don't care about your feelings. Facts don't care about the ideological agenda of people on the left and their capacity and their desire to virtue signal. Now, this talk by Malcolm Gladwell was given, I want to say, about 3 years ago, right? But here's the thing. I wonder if we can go back even further and demonstrate that this is not new information, right? This is something that colleges and universities have known for quite some time. And in fact, we can do that because we're going to look at the great Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell might be the GOAT of social commentators and political ideologies, because Tom Sowell, who also went to Harvard, Tom Sowell, who has been a professor at some Ivy League schools and very prestigious universities, he goes on to talk about how black students, often because of affirmative action, end up failing and not completing their education. So let's take a look at Thomas Sowell and some of his observations.
When you got to education in the United States, you talked about affirmative action, and you came up with some statistics that I wanted to ask you about. Well, I look for, here it is. You said that at the University of California at Berkeley, for example, where the entering freshman class has been described as, quote, wonderfully diverse, unquote, because the, quote, class closely reflects the actual ethnic distribution of California high school students. These are your words. More than 70% of black students fail to graduate.
Yes.
Why?
Because they're mismatched with Berkeley. That is, these students, the average black student at Berkeley is above the national average on test scores. It's just that the average white student is further above the national average, and the average Asian student further above than the white students.
Look at this video. You can just tell by the graininess of it. This was done in the 70s. I do not know exactly when this video or when this interview was done, but it couldn't have been done any earlier or any later than the early 1980s. So now let's just think about what this implies. For decades, colleges and universities have been promoting race-based preferences. Okay? You know that they have the information on the pass and failure rates of their minority students. They know this information and they haven't changed course. Now, why do you think that would be? Let's listen to Dr. Sowell Let's listen to him explain maybe why.
And so in that atmosphere, these students who have every qualification to succeed are artificially turned into failures. And the only beneficiary of that is the University of California at Berkeley. Because what they've effectively done is rented these bodies for window dressing for a few years. And then when they're through with them, they're put aside. A new bunch of bodies are brought in.
Have you told them that?
Oh, yes.
And what do they say to you?
Oh, different things. I remember one fellow saying, "Oh, Tom, I'm just a little guy. I can't do anything about this."
Window dressing. You know what we call that nowadays? We actually call it virtue signaling. You see, if the left really cared about the minority student, they would look at this phenomena, this well-documented phenomena, one that we saw from Malcolm Gladwell, that it's about class rank, not about the university. As a matter of fact, if you go listen to the rest of that talk, and I encourage you to do that, the name of the video is Why You Shouldn't Go to Harvard. Why you shouldn't go to Harvard. That's interesting, isn't it? He said you should actually not even go to the university, to the top university that you got admitted into. You should go to the second or third. Why? Because you'll likely have a higher class rank and therefore be more likely to succeed. So we know that that's the case. We know that even Tom Sowell, even back then, was notifying the university administration that his black students were failing because they were mismatched with the university. And they said, we don't know anything about that. All they cared about was being able to print some headline about how diverse their student body was. It's a bunch of bullcrap. And yes, it makes me mad because this is what needs to be understood about these conversations that we have. It's not about what people think is right. The only thing that matters is what's actually happening, what's actually being produced from these policies. And not only did the Supreme Court of the United States declare that these policies were unconstitutional, but they could have made the case, even though they did not, that it doesn't even help these students that it's supposedly targeting. Now, to bring this full circle, this is quite interesting. Malcolm Gladwell, I told you, I think I mentioned this book, Outlier. That's my favorite book of all time. He's got this is so interesting. He's got a chapter in the book. So the book Outliers is about why people are exceptional, or basically phenomena where you have these people who do things that are exceptional. Or he even documents a tragic case of of Korean Airlines having had at one point a terrible record of fatal plane crashes. And it was like their rate of plane crashes was something like 10, 20x that of everywhere else in the world. And he did a study on why that was, and uncovered that they had a very exceptional culture that enabled that level of failure. So basically the whole idea is about things that stand out, things that are basically statistical outliers. But he actually has a chapter in the book about Asians and why they're so good at math and how it actually reflects on their cultural standards. And it's not necessarily that Asians are particularly smart, but they have a different mentality and view. In a sense, it tends to produce more people who excel in the STEM fields. So interestingly enough, Malcolm Gladwell did that book on outliers, and then he did this video about how class rank is more important. And the main plaintiffs and the people who brought suit to the Supreme Court of the United States about this admissions discrimination were the Asian students, because they were the ones being booted out in favor of the minorities. Talk about full circle. The fact of the matter is that you cannot socially engineer success. You cannot put your thumb on the scale. And this is something that people on the left would not accept. That what's more important is their ideology. What's more important is them being able to say, look at how much we care about these Negroes. Look at how much we care about the Latinas. Look at how much we care about the women. It's a bunch of nonsense. And it's time that we start waking up and understanding that this is not just about college admissions. It's not just about a lot of the things we talk about. This is about the subverting of our culture and our society to make it into something where they have the power and control. Because if they really cared about people, they would see information like this and they would course correct, but they don't do it. I'm interested to hearing your perspective, friends. Of course, put a comment, like this video, share this video, and subscribe to my channel if you have not done so. I appreciate you, my friends. Till next time, God bless you.